Welcome to today's episode of Words of the Wise. Today I have Chief Parma from Sleepy Hollow PD in Illinois. Almost 37 years total in law enforcement, has spent the last 5 years as chief of police. He is the immediate past president of the Northern Division of FBI National Association, and the third vice president for the Illinois State Board of FBI National Academy Association. Welcome to the show, Chief Parma. Thank you so much for being here today. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Glad to be here.
Yeah, no, I'm looking forward to it. When we were talking offline a little bit, I know that leadership is something that's really important to you. And so one of the things that you had said is that leadership is a characteristic and not a title. What did you mean by that?
I think the biggest thing is to think about cops we spend our careers judging people, learning to read people. And, we've all had those quote unquote supervisors or leaders in our organizations that like to fall back on, do it because I said to do it. And to me, I look at our leadership starting from the time you're a young patrol officer all the way up until you're the most senior patrol officer, street sergeant, lieutenant, captain, deputy chief, whatever. And I think at each level, you're responsible for that leadership. And the officers figure it out. They figure out whether or not you're genuine. They figure out whether or not you actually care about what's going on in their lives. Do you recognize when the officers are having a bad day? And even when I was a patrol officer, that was one of the big things is if I could tell that an officer of a cohort was kind of off that day, and we'd have a conversation, we'd meet for coffee or we'd talk, and I'm like, hey, what's going on? I could tell you're a little bit off today. And I think they realize that that's a genuine approach. And I think that's huge in organizations, especially when you get into small organizations. We're a 15 officer organization, so we're fairly small. It's easy for bad leaders to get lost in a 150 or 200 man department. When you got a smaller department and you've got two or three leaders, it's difficult to hide. There really is nowhere to hide for us.
Yeah, no, thank you. I'm curious, if we were to really kind of dissect what qualities a leader, an effective leader should have, what are some of those core qualities or principles you think that everyone should either strive for or should innately have within themselves?
I think you have to be willing to challenge yourself, come out of your comfort and challenge yourself, and keep growing. Because I've always said that to me, the most dangerous law enforcement officer in the world is the one that says they know everything. Because this job changes every day. The laws are changing. The people is changing. The expectations of society is changing. The expectations of our political base is changing. The expectations of our stakeholders are changing. And if you say you know it all, you've just basically proven to the world how dumb you really are in the end. So I think that's one of the characteristics you have to be willing to challenge yourself. I think the other thing is be willing to give officers or give the people around you the opportunity to be successful. We're control freaks by nature. We're that type A personality. We want to control everything. And as supervisors, as we're going through organizations or even as senior officers, whether you're a field training officer, a street sergeant or whatever, we tend to want to control everything instead of letting officers go out there and fail sometimes, as long as, obviously we don't want them to have a catastrophic failure.
Right.
But you want them to fail a little bit to learn how to do the job the right way, how to deal with, individuals the right way. So I think that's another thing you have to do is be willing to allow people to excel. And I think the last thing is check your ego. Put your ego aside, because some of the worst people I've ever worked for, and even before I got into law enforcement, were the people whose ego was bigger than their position. And I always say that if the most important person to you is the person you see in the mirror every day, then you're going to have a problem regardless of what you do. I don't care if you're a police officer, a business manager, a taxi driver, it doesn't matter. So yeah, you got to be able to be willing to put other people first. And do the right thing, make the right decisions for the organization, and it may not necessarily always be the right thing for you.
Wow. Okay. I want to dissect each one that you said, because I think that these were really good. So The first one of understanding that it's not a destination, right? It's a forever journey of learning and growing. And I think that can be really scary for a lot of us. I think that people are afraid to be new at something. They're afraid to suck at something, especially as you start to gain more experience in whatever role you're in. I think that we all, at some point in our careers, and maybe it's just me, maybe you can't relate, but I feel like I had moments in my career where I didn't think that I knew it all. I definitely did not think I knew it all. But I felt like maybe I should put on a perception that I knew it all, because I was like, at a certain level. And it's scary to put yourself out there in front of other people who are maybe less experienced as you, and to like let them see you sweat, if that makes
Sure.
sense, to kind of
Yeah.
like trip and fall in front of other people. I think that can be really scary. And so I think that's why a lot of people kind of like hold true to, where they are, and they're like, yep, I've arrived. And I completely agree with you that I think that we are doing not only ourselves, but everyone around us such a disservice if we think that we've arrived. We always have to be challenging ourselves in different ways, and we have to get comfortable in the discomfort of quote unquote failing or sucking at something and letting
Yep.
people see you sweat.
Yeah. Well, and the way I try and explain it to the officers is you're going to go through your career and you're going to hit different milestones, and you may move out of patrol eventually. There's guys that I know that are just they're 25, 30-year patrolmen, and that's all they really ever wanted to do. And they're comfortable in that position, but yet they didn't stop growing.
Yeah.
Every year they became the best patrolman that they could be. And then the same goes true for being the best sergeant that you can be, the best FTO you can be, the best deputy chief, the best chief that you can be. It doesn't matter, or it doesn't mean you're not going to make mistakes. I mean, I tell the guys here all the time, I've made more mistakes today than you're probably going to make this entire week. But each time I do that, I learn from it, and I try and make sure that I'm not repeating it. And I also make sure that those mistakes are not mistakes of character, like I talked about
Right.
before. If I make a wrong decision, it's because I really believe that that was the right decision to make at the time, but you're never going to be perfect. And then in the end, I tell them, here's the way you have to think about it. Because anybody that's been in this business for a long time will tell you that there is, you can get a 10-year officer, two 10-year officers standing next to each other. And one is just excelling in his career. He's challenging himself. He's going out and he's really hitting it hard every day and trying to be the best officer that they can be. And then you've got the other 10-year officer that's, what a lot of us organizationally call the slugs, basically, for no better word, is they just have spent the last 10 years, surviving essentially. And when I put those two side by side, I explained to the young officers that really there's a huge difference between 10 years experience and 1 year experience repeated 10 times.
Mm.
And I always look at it saying, you don't want to be that 1 year experience repeated 10 times guy. You want to be that officer with 10 years experience or 15 years experience, because you've varied your career, you've learned, you've grown, and you're an asset to the organization every time you're involved in something.
Yeah, 100%. The second thing you said was delegate. And that is so difficult for me, at least. That has always been so difficult. So I can relate a lot to that of like, hey, like we're control freaks. We want to do everything ourselves, but understanding that you have to loosen the reins a little bit, and you have to let people thrive, and you have to trust people to do a good
Right.
job. And I have learned that it's so funny. It's so funny the stories we tell ourselves, right? Like I have in my career been like, I am the only one that can do it. I can do it the best. No one else can do it better than me. And then you let someone do something and they do it better than you. And you're like, okay, I really thought higher of myself than I should have. And I should have had trust in my team. And I think the goal is that you build a team around you that is as good, if not better than you. That's the goal, right? You want everyone to be successful around you, and you want to give them the opportunities to be even more successful. And the only way to do that is to sometimes give up that control. And delegation can be really challenging, but it also is really freeing. And to me, like now I'm a delegating queen. just I want everyone to like do all the things, because then they have ownership of those things too, and they get excited about being able to do other things that maybe they don't necessarily get to do. And I think that helps to build trust both ways.
Yeah, and it makes your job easier. I
Yeah.
mean, in the end, we have so many responsibilities as we move up in organizations. If I try and keep everything, it's my ball and nobody else can play with it, then I'm not. I'm going to be a generalist. I'm not going to really be good at any one thing because I'm trying to take care of everything else. The other thing is you're right. You're not going to. The people in your organization are not going to continue to develop and to thrive in your organization, and they're not going to be that 10 or 15 year officer. They're going to end up being that guy with 1 year repeated 10 or 15 times. I just I look at it that I when everybody's always asking you, how do you describe yourself? What kind of leader do you describe yourself as? And there's all these buzz terms that everybody uses. And the one I've always landed on is a transformational leader, because I look at my job, and regardless of when I was a patrol officer, an FTO, a sergeant, a deputy chief, and now a chief, I look at my job as to constantly be training my replacement.
Hmm.
And that's always the way I've looked at it. Not that I want to get kicked out of the job, but I should leave my position, promote somebody to sergeant or whatever the case is, and know that that person is really ready for that position. They're really ready to hit the floor running. And a lot of the times we don't do that. We don't prepare people for it. We just stick them in these positions, and then we say go forth and conquer. And when they fail, we blame the officer, we blame the person instead of blaming leadership, when leadership really should have done a better job of preparing them.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think the other thing is, because you also said ego in here. And I think
Hmm.
they all are related, right? It's like, how can you continue to learn? How can you allow other people to thrive by delegation? And then how can you understand that you are not the most important person in the room? And I think that it can be really challenging. I think a lot of these things can actually be really challenging when it's a competitive environment. And to your point, you said you kind of like let people go and then you see if they win or they fail. And I think that in some ways, and I'm not speaking for everybody, in some ways, because of the competitive nature, I feel like some people almost don't want other people to succeed because it makes them look less than because it's so competitive, right? And other people are going
Hmm.
after your job. But how can we create an environment where you can still strive to be the best version of yourself and you can still help other people to thrive? And two can exist at once, right? Like you can still be competitive, you can still be the best at what you do or strive to be the best at what you do, and you can help build other people up instead of tearing other people down. And so I think that somewhere along the line, we thought that we were like, if we just protect our bubble
Right.
and knock everyone away, that means I'm going to rise higher. And I think actually the opposite is true. I think that when you have that like friendly competition, but you still have the best interest of the person next to you in mind, I think that allows you to be even better than like building up this, wall and keeping everybody out.
Yeah, I guess one of the ways another way I like to look at things is when you're working with a team, you have a team of officers you're working with. You want to be the person that everybody wants to work with.
Yep.
And then when you get promoted, you want to be the guy that everybody wants to work for, guy or girl. In law enforcement, we have a nasty habit of saying guys and we should be saying guys and girls, but we don't, because to me, the badge doesn't have a sex associated with it. So just to be clear on that. Um, but you want to be the person that people want to work for, because you were the person that people wanted to work with. And that's important. If you keep everybody at arm's length, then they know you're going to, because we let's face it, it's difficult as adults, especially as we get a little bit older, it's difficult for us to change. And pretty much the person that you are, um, is going to be the person that you are or the person that you are is going to be your future you as well. Best way of
Mhm.
saying it. That doesn't mean we can't change, we can't keep growing, but those traits, that distrust or that I'm not going to share with you attitude, a lot of times that does follow supervisors to the next level and the next level, and then it kind of permeates down through the organization, and doesn't allow people to keep growing. And you'll see people jumping from that team to this team because they don't want to work for this person. They want to work for this other person. So,
Yeah. I had a mentor really early in my career, and this always stuck with me. They said, um, give them everything and beat them anyway. And I really liked that because it was like this idea of like, give them all your secrets, help them, train them, like show
Mhm.
them all you know, give them everything that you have and still be the best.
Mhm.
Because you can do that, and again, I think it's not or. And I think we've somehow along the lines have thought it was like either or, and it's not. It's like I can help build people up. I can share all of my knowledge, everything that I've learned over, my X amount of years in my particular profession. I can share all of it and I can still be at the top of my game.
Sure.
Those two can exist at once. And so I really liked that. I always try to live by that. And I think that if we could all live a little bit more by that, then I think we would all, because I think in a team mentality, you're only as strong as your weakest link. And so
Right.
if you're not helping the weakest link, you're all being dragged down to the bottom. So how can you help elevate everybody as a team?
Yeah. I mean, a train has a locomotive and it has a caboose, but in the end, they're all pulling in the same direction.
Yep.
And that's just an easy way of looking at it. And if you have one, you can't have one boxcar in the middle that's not pulling in the same direction as the engine and the caboose. So um, I think a lot of it is small organizations. It's easier for us, than big organizations, because the big organizations, it is that competitive nature to be the top guy so that you can get promoted to detectives, or you can get that traffic assignment that you want so that you're working Monday through Friday or whatever the case is. In a smaller organization, it's not quite as competitive because there's just not all those specialty assignments.
Mm.
So we've got a bunch of generalists that have to do everything. They have to take the call, they have to do the follow up on it, and then we have a detective that will get involved in things. But for the most part, the patrol guys are the ones doing that, and then a sergeant and myself helping out. But for the most part, they have to do everything. So we're lucky we don't have that competitiveness. But the bigger the organization, the more layers you create, then yeah, you're gonna definitely have that competition. It's gonna be something that leadership's gonna have to kind of keep an eye on, and then have that attitude just permeate back through the organization that we're gonna keep promoting people. And we want you to keep working because we want the best of the best.
Hmm.
We're not going to promote somebody just because, oh, you've got 10 years on, so you're the next sergeant. So you don't want to be voluntold to be a sergeant, that's for sure.
What is, as a leader, what is one thing that you have zero tolerance for?
So me, ethical, moral, legal decision making. We all talk about mentors in our lives, and I go back to my very first chief. He passed away, and one of the very first things he told me is, "Don't ever do anything on this job that you would be embarrassed to tell your mother you did."
Mm.
And that really stuck with me. That really stuck with me. And so I've kind of taken that approach to my career. Not that we're not going to make mistakes. Again, we're going to make mistakes, but you've got those acts of omission, those acts of commission. And I have that discussion with all the officers I hire. I sit down, we talk kind of informally, and I tell them that up front. Look, if you have an act of omission, you simply forget to do something, your training is not up to par, your experience level didn't allow you to be successful in that situation. We're going to identify it. We're going to train you. We're going to mentor you. We're going to coach you, and we're going to get better for it as an organization. But if you do something intentionally on this job, where you intentionally do something wrong, you intentionally do something illegal, immoral, or unethical, you won't work for me.
Mm.
That's just the way it is. I have no tolerance for that. I won't dislike you, but you're just not going to be a police officer for me, and you're free to go somewhere else and try and do the job with somebody else, but you won't work for me.
Yeah. Have you ever worked in an environment or for an agency that kept people who maybe they shouldn't have? And I see like you shaking your head, yes.
Yep.
What did that do to the morale and the culture within the organization when you do keep people there who, make those mistakes or those decisions?
So again, if you've got an officer that keeps messing up, and again, those acts of omission, where they just keep, they're making mistakes, and sometimes we're our own worst enemy because we are that personality type where we're perfectionists and we want to be in control all the time. So when we make a mistake, we worry about that mistake, we lament over that mistake, and then that causes us to make more mistakes.
Mm.
And it kind of sometimes compounds itself and just keeps going in a bad direction. One of the things I've kind of prided myself here is a lot of the times we'll hire officers that have like failed in another field training program for whatever reason. And so what I try and do is I try and hire the person. I've got a position I've got to fill, but I want to make sure that I'm hiring a good person so that I can train that person how to be the police. We can always do that. But I can't train a person to be a good person.
Yeah.
That's those character things that are difficult to kind of get around. So I always look for good people, and then I bring them into the organization. And I've, knock on wood, I've been lucky being able to do that. But if you're allowing people to get away with those immoral, unethical decision making, it acts as a cancer throughout your organization. It actually retards the good people in your organization from wanting to do their job because they're like, look, if this guy can get away with all this stuff, why would I bother doing my job? I'm putting myself out there because let's face it, in this job, the busier we are and the more aggressive we are in a good way, the more we're out there, the more dangerous the job becomes for us. So you're going to create that attitude. Well, why should I do that if this guy is just kind of floating by doing everything wrong and nobody ever does anything about it? It
Right.
just destroys your organization.
Yeah, 100%. And that was my thought process when you were saying that, is that I would imagine that from a morale or a culture standpoint, that it would cause a lot of um, distrust. It would cause a lot of challenges. And we all know that culture is something that's really important.
Yeah.
And my question to you is, as a leader, especially nowadays that we know that, hiring is harder, retention is harder. There are a lot of agencies who are struggling to keep bodies, and keep people within the organization. How are you able to uphold that standard? Is it just a non-negotiable where you're like, we're hiring good people, period, and we'd rather have less on the street than have, just anyone out on the street?
Yep.
Yeah.
And I've said that. One of the things I said when they hired me was exactly that. I said, I'm not going to hire marginal people. In a small town, the one nice thing about our town is, we're 3,500 residents somewhere in that area. So the people in the town deserve to know their police officers. They on a personal level. In Chicago, outside the community service or the community-based officers, they're not going to necessarily be able to know all the officers on the street. We have a luxury of that being the case. So I want to make sure that if I'm going to take these officers, I'm going to put them out there in front of our residents and have them interacting with our residents and whether it's doing things in their homes or at community events with them or whatever the case is, I want to make sure that those are the right people. And
Mhm.
that's why I said before, I hire the person first, and then I worry about let's see if we can train them.
Yeah. Yeah, I like that a lot because I agree with you. I think that you can train a lot of skills, but there are some skills that are not trainable.
Mm-hmm.
And so I appreciate you saying that because I think a lot of people are, at least through the conversations I've had, a lot of people are struggling to maintain those standards, and there have been a lot of conversations where they're like, yeah, like we used to have these standards, but now we don't because we need more people or because we're struggling with hiring. And so for you to be like, I'm not gonna loosen, my standards. I'm gonna make sure that we hire good people. I think it's
Mm-hmm.
good. Yeah.
Well, and historically in policing, when we lower our standards, and you can look at some of the biggest organizations across the country that have been embroiled in like major corruption issues. It's a lot of times it's because we lower our standards. We bring people into this profession, and I will maintain that our profession is one of the toughest, but one of the most honorable professions that you could possibly get into. I hold it at that regard, to me above everything. And um, when you hire people and bring them into this and you provide them with all these opportunities to do the wrong thing, don't be shocked when they do it if you hire the wrong people. And that's what happens. And again, historically, it happens in these big organizations, and I'm not going to name departments, but it happens across the country. And then all of a sudden, you've got politicians and other people on and leadership saying, "I'm shocked that this happened," and really, it was predictable. You should have known
Yeah.
it was coming,
You're sitting on the sideline. You're like, I'm not shocked.
right?
You're like, I saw it from a mile away. What is, and we talked a little bit about this offline. What do you think is the big threat to an organization?
I think culture is. There's no question that culture is because Culture affects every part of your operations. It doesn't matter what it is, from the very, the officers that are out on patrol every day, to your detectives, to your community-based policing officers, your officers that are in the schools interacting with the kids, your leadership. That culture affects every part of your organization, and there's no part of your organization that you could shield from that. So yeah, I think the biggest threat is to organizations that have caustic cultures and they don't do things or don't try and take steps to try and mitigate that.
If you were stepping into an environment where there was a negative culture, what would be the first thing that you would do to try to fix that or to try to create more of a positive culture?
So I think one of the things that we have to do is, and I think a lot of chiefs do this, but a lot of big organizations are not able to. When I came in, the first thing I did was I sat down with every officer and we talked very candidly. And I told them, you guys, there's no secrets here. Tell me exactly what's going on with the organizations. What are we doing well? What are we not doing well? And then I kind of established the baseline of, okay, now you're telling me all this stuff about the organization. Let me tell you a little bit about me. And this is my expectations as far as who I am, how I act, how I behave, how I go about my life. And I told them very early on that, look, the person you see right now sitting in this meeting with you, that's having this conversation with you, I'm the same person that goes home tonight. And when I'm sitting and talking to my wife or I'm talking to my kids, I'm that same guy. And you have to be that as well. You can't have two different personas and say, well, I'm this way at work, but then I'm a different person at home, because then, you start to, well, which one do I have to be, or which one do I want to be?
Yeah.
So yeah, I think you have to be really, really, really careful with that.
Yeah. I think you're right that it's harder within bigger organizations to do that, but I think it's totally possible.
Hmm.
It might take a lot longer to get in front of everyone and have those conversations, but I would guess it's all a matter of time blocking. It's like,
Yeah.
okay, from 1 o'clock to 2 p.m. every day for the next 6 months or whatever that looks like. I'm going to have two one-on-ones until we get it done, even if it takes a year, or I'm going to do 5, 10 one-on-ones a day for this many days until we get in front of everyone. I think that that's totally possible. And I think people appreciate that. I think people appreciate you looking them in the eye and genuinely caring what they think, and for you to be like, there's no secrets in here, tell me everything,
Right.
and to build that trust and to have those one-on-one conversations, I think is really important. I think people want to feel like they're connected to their leadership and that their leadership sees and values them as a human and as an employee and as a teammate and not just a number. And I think I've had plenty of conversations with people who are like, yeah, I've been here for this many years and I've never once had a conversation with the chief
Hmm.
ever,
Yeah, and
and it's disconnecting.
it is. And it's tough. I mean, I get it in some of these really huge organizations, but each of those huge organizations is still segmented into, different districts. And within your district, there's no reason that you as a district commander can't have those discussions with your people. If you've got 150 or 200 people that work for you in your district in some of the larger organizations, there's
Yeah.
no reason you can't sit down and have those discussions. Going out and riding with the guys occasionally, getting involved in not necessarily in the everyday calls for service, but at least getting involved with the officers, seeing what they're doing on the street, seeing what they need, and just kind of staying in touch with the officers rather than going in, sitting in your ivory tower and kind of judging everything from the top down.
Yeah, 100%. And I've had conversations with, people who are involved in, a toxic culture. And I've had officers in tears saying, I've been in this organization for 5 years and I've seen everything imaginable out on the streets, every gory, horrific scene that you can possibly imagine. And I've never felt more stress than I do with, the organizational stress. And so, like you said, how can you make it work? Regardless of how large your organization is, how can you make it work so that people feel like you care about them? And when you invest in them, they'll invest back in you as an organization.
Yeah, and I think another thing that we have to remember is this job, and I'm sure you've heard this from 90% of the chiefs that you talk to, this job can consume you. It can become every part of your time when you're on duty. It can become every part of you when you're off duty. It can just consume your entire life. And it's really important. And I tell people all the time, being a police officer is what you do. It is not who you are. Always remember that. It's always good to have friends who are not police officers, have acquaintances, things that you do that are not police related, because we all see those kids when they come into this job and they're the police on duty, they're the police off duty. They go home and they watch police videos, and you're like, and I tell them all the time, you have to turn that off.
Mhm.
Have some friends that are not cops. Don't talk, and when they ask you about talking about cop stuff, don't talk to them because they're all going to want to know. But just be a normal person. And, yeah, we like to say we're normal, but we're really not when you consider everything that we do and see and go through.
Yeah.
But yeah, be a normal person and be able to kind of shut off that persona and remember it's what you do, it's not who you are.
Yeah. And I think that that is, at least for me, it was a lot easier for me, and obviously we have different careers, but it was a lot easier for me to do that when I got older. I feel like when I was younger, I thought that it was all or nothing, that I
Hmm.
had to absolutely be consumed by the career or else I wouldn't, reach the goals that I had set for myself. And I think as I got older, I was able to like take that step back and reassess what's important to me, and where my priorities really are. And you have to you have to have interests and hobbies and things that you do that connect you to who you are, outside of
Hmm.
what you do. And I think so often, I mean, how many of us, when they say, hey, like, I'm so and so, nice to meet you, what do you do? It's like the first question that we
Yep.
ask, and it's always what leads the conversations. And I have left many parties or weddings or whatever, and I've looked at my partner before and been like, if one more person asks me what I do, I'm gonna lose it. Like, we need to leave, and I think we have to be mindful of that. Like, are we having surface level conversations? Are we only interested in what people do, or are we interested in who people are? And how can we show people who we are outside of what we do? And I have a lot of bios that are sent over, and I think we always forget to put our personal piece, myself included. Something
Sure.
personal about ourselves. Because you are more than all the accolades. You said you're a dad, you're a husband. So
Yep.
I think it's important to highlight those things, and it's important to invest in those things. And I think that that really segues really well into the topic of wellness, because I think that that's a piece of it. How can we offload some of the stress? How can we encourage healthy coping mechanisms for things? How can we make sure that you have the bandwidth to be able to go home and be present and mindful with your family and find joy in the things that you used to enjoy outside of the career? And so I know that, you're, in the process of building out your wellness program, but if you had to think about, kind of the definition of wellness, or maybe what you're trying to achieve when it comes to supporting the wellness of your people, what would that be? Because obviously there's a lot of buzzwords in the wellness space too, and I think that it's maybe hard to define, and each agency is kind of working through it on their own.
Well, I think a couple of things. So when I got hired here, we didn't have an EAP. We had no EAP at all, and I started asking questions about, well, what if you have an employee that's either involved in a critical incident or they're struggling personally, for whatever reason it is, whether they're going through a divorce or they're going through some personal trials, financial problems, where do you send them? And there was no answer. We had nothing available, and one of the very first things I did was we initiated an EAP program, which to me that's your baseline,
Mhm.
for every organization. That's your baseline, and then from there you kind of try and get involved in some other things with the officers. But a lot of the times, for me, it's having those officers have those outlets outside of work, to be able to make sure that they can offload everything that we deal with on a regular basis. And again, that's where that important having those conversations with your friend who's an accountant and he's not a cop, is great, because they're going to talk. How many? There's not many accountants that want to talk about, like, the general ledgers that they went over the last week, but everybody wants to talk about what we do.
Yeah.
And if we never get an opportunity to kind of stop that mindfulness that we're always having, that stress just builds up and builds up and builds up. And that's the other thing is, I think as an organization, where I'm trying to get to is trying to make sure that all of our people understand that if there's issues going on, a lot of chiefs will say, "Oh, I have an open door policy," but I really mean that. I have no issues at all with somebody walking in, sitting down, and us having a conversation. And I want to make sure that message is consistent and out there all the time. I do that with the residents. I have residents stop by all the time. They want to just sit down and chat, and they come in and we talk. So I have that same attitude with our residents that I do with our officers.
Yeah. I I've always lived by this idea that conversations save lives, and I really think they do. I think the more we can talk to our loved ones about things, the more we can talk to our friends. And then if you need to speak to a professional, then you have the, access and availability
Mhm.
to do that as well. And I think, and I can only speak for myself because I know everyone's different. It's so nuanced. But I used to shove everything down. I used to posture up, and it made me really angry. It made me really reactive. I chose really bad coping mechanisms, for these things that I didn't want to process, and it almost ruined my life. And I was, faced with kind of a crossroads moment where I was like, wow, I got to make a change. Like something has to give here, and
Mhm.
so I know what it's like to be in that position where, you don't want people to, see you as weak, or, you don't maybe want to admit that something is bothering you. And I think as I started to kind of unload those things, and as I started to seek out healthier resources for myself and understand, the importance of processing, now I do not care if someone thinks I'm weak at all. Like, for me, like if I can have a platform like this and I can say, yeah, I struggle, like there are still days where my anxiety is through the roof and I have to work really hard to
Mhm.
try to bring that down. There are days where I wake up and, I'm not in a positive mindset, and I have to work really hard to like get myself into that right mindset to be able to lead the day. I think if we can maybe just a little bit, kind of release that fear of being judged and like what people think of us, and we can just have relatable conversations. I'm sure that there's someone listening now that feels the same way. That's like, yeah, some days I have anxiety. Some days I wake up and I'm sad. Some days like things are really hard. Sometimes I fight with my partner, like, and these things stress me out. It's like we can all relate to each other in one way or another, and so why can't we talk to each other about it,
Right.
because it's so isolating when we don't, and we think that we're the only ones. And I think that's where we get ourselves into trouble a lot of the times is, trying to mask or hide those things, thinking that we're going to be judged or that no one else is going through the same things that we are. But in reality, a lot of people are going through the same things that we are.
Yeah. Well, in law enforcement, for the longest time, we were just the leadership in law enforcement was I refer to them as dinosaurs. I mean, they'd just done everything the same way they did it when it was in the Stone Ages, and they were just doing it the same way. And they created that culture of, you know what, if you're struggling with it, you just swallow it and you just move on to the next call. We are in as a profession. That's one thing I'm very proud of our profession. We are our leap years, light years ahead of where we used to be in terms of officers having the ability to seek help and not be judged and things like that. We still have a long way to go, but we're definitely light years ahead of where we used to be.
I agree. Yeah, when I started in this wellness space 9 years ago, so different.
Hmm.
Even that, amount of time, like 8, 9 years ago, it looked so different than it does now. So I agree. And my hope is that it continues, and we start to see more and more evolution, and it becomes better and better. And, we make sure that everyone has the resources that they need to be successful and to have quality of life when they get to the end of this thing. And then you can run around with your grandkids.
Yeah, and enjoy the biggest thing with police officers being able to enjoy your retirement.
Yeah.
That's if you're stressed out your entire career and you never have any releases, how many times do we hear of officers that retire and like 2 years later they're gone?
Mhm.
And it's like, did you work your entire life and give to this profession to ultimately you gave pretty much by choice your life for this profession then. And that's why it's so important to have those outlets to be able to, yeah, I do want to be able to spend time with my wife in retirement, my kids in retirement, my hopefully someday grandkids in my retirement. And oftentimes it just doesn't happen. And that's the sad reality of this job.
I agree. Yeah. And it's interesting because I've had a lot of leaders that are like, the younger generation are more open to these things and they're more receptive. And I'm like, yeah, because of you guys, because of leadership today.
Hmm.
To your point, you said, maybe previous leadership didn't know these things yet, and didn't know to have these conversations and they operated in a certain way. And now you guys, as, that next kind of generation of leadership are now seeing some of those challenges that, occurred by not prioritizing wellness, and now you're making it a priority. So now the younger generation is coming in and they're like, oh yeah, like we've always had these conversations,
Right.
we're open to it, it's more normal. And so I think that every leader who's listening to this, give yourselves credit. I don't think that the younger generation necessarily came in here automatically open to it. I think that if you guys were to have operated like everyone had in the past and it said, suck it up, shove it down, they probably would have the same mentality. And so for, you guys to put in the effort now, it's going to pay dividends in the future. And
Hmm.
they're going to be the next leaders that are going to continue to, hold that torch.
Yep. I agree 100%. We're
My
getting there.
We're getting there. Yeah, I agree. For my last question, words of wisdom for the younger generation. If you could go back and give your younger self advice, what would that be?
Probably what I've already said. And that's just remember that this job is what you do. It's not who you are.
Mm.
You want to always be the best version of yourself in terms of whatever position you're in this job, or this profession. But make sure that you have that work-life balance, and that's something that we lose. I was really lucky. Like so, my very first chief. And he reinforced that he was an awesome family man, a very caring leader. So I had a really good mentor to work with in that situation. And I know a lot of chiefs out there, they can go back through their career and say, you know what, I learned as much from the bad leaders I had as I did from the good leaders because you learn what not to do from those people. But yeah, just always remember that this profession is what we do. It's not who we are. It can't be who we are because that usually doesn't end up in a good place for the officer, their families, their relatives, things like that, and the people they work with.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate you coming on here and talking about leadership and wellness. Thank you.
Absolutely. My pleasure.